Manual receipt matching is a waste of your valuable business time, and I'm going to show you exactly how to eliminate it. In the next few minutes, you'll see how to build out a system that finds the right transaction even when you have multiple similar charges. It reads your receipts, whether they're images or PDFs, using character recognition, and handle those tricky receipts that don't match any transaction at all. This is the automation that can give you the biggest returns for your time in a setup that'll take just 15 minutes. And because everyone hates matching receipts to bank statements manually. So you can either grab the template inside the resource hub in the paid school community in the description below. So head down to bookkeeping underneath operations, and we've got a complete setup guide here, as well as the workflow. Or you can follow along with the logic to build it yourself for free as well. So let's jump straight into the demo. And like I mentioned, we're going to show you how to match to the correct transaction when there's multiple similar transactions, how it handles multiple image formats. So whether you have a receipt that's an image or a screenshot, or a PDF that's coming from a software company, for example. And then finally, how it handles receipts when no matching transaction is found, so that it's still easy to reconcile later manually for the edge cases. So let's quickly talk about the setup of this. So first of all, we are going to be fetching all of our raw transactions from our bank account, and we're going to need to set up a connection with our bank account that sends all of that data, either using a third-party app or your bank directly, sends all of that data to a Google Sheet. So the Google Sheet will look something like this, where we have transaction information with things like the company name, the category, the amount, the local currency. I bank with Monzo, and I can automatically set up this. If you don't bank with Monzo, other banks also offer this, or there's third-party integrations that can set up live transactions pushing to a Google Sheet like this. And the first automation is simply, as soon as one goes into that live transaction sheet, we append that data into our own Google Sheet, which we're using as a central finance reconciliation sheet here. And you can see that we've got some lookups to match certain months and certain categories for certain expenses. For example, 11 Labs is software. It might not be recognized, and therefore when we come to reconcile it later, we'll want to know what category our costs fall into. We then have the raw live sheet. So every time a transaction is put into our sheet that's connected to our bank, it will be put into here and processed. And that is our first automation here. It's just simply a Google Sheet trigger from one sheet to the next. So when you come to set this up, you'll need to make a copy of this sheet. All of this is linked in the template, and map the respective columns from the transactions from your bank to the columns in your raw live sheet here. And that's just going to log all of our live transactions. And that means when we move on to step 2, which is actually receiving the receipts and invoices into a mailbox, it's going to have transactions to refer to and try and match that. So we've got a few columns here which are going to be filled out by the next part of the automation, which is if it came in via email, what email address did it come from? And we're going to actually link to that email. So if we want to refer back later, we've got a full trail there. It's going to upload it to a Google Drive, and you can swap this out for a Dropbox or a shared drive. It's just I've used Google Drive for this example, and it's going to then link to the actual file. It's going to give us a file name, and we've predetermined a standardized way to name these based on the data coming in. It's going to give you the extracted text and then even give you a download link. So later, when we connect it to something like Free Agent or Xero or our accounting software, we've done all the reconciliation hard part. We just need to upload the link to the document then. So what we're going to end up with are transactions with links to the direct receipt that we can later upload to our accounting software if we choose to do so, or we can simply use this sheet as a database and actually keep all of our transactions and make our reports from here. And then the third tab, which is going to help us here later when we come to reconcile some manually, is any unmatched receipts. So if there's a transaction that exists in this sheet and a receipt comes in and it can't find the correct transaction, then that's going to be populated with similar details, all of the links to the email, the file, etc., the total due in here, so that we can actually reconcile these ones, the edge cases, manually, and make it much simpler to find and reconcile these ones as well. So I'm going to go back and do a demo now of 3 different areas in which this works, and then we'll talk through node by node how this actually works later on. So the first is a typical use case, right? You have software like Slack where you get expensed every single month. We're going to receive in an invoice and we want it to match to the correct transaction. So I'm going to show you how this uses AI to determine the correct transaction from a list of transactions. And this works whether you have 4 transactions like we've got here for the demo, or 50, 100, 1,000 transactions. It will try and find the correct one and place that correctly, mainly because it's got recency bias and it will look at the most recent transactions. So you can see we've got 3 Slack payments in here, one from June, one from July, and one from August. Now we've set up a mailbox specifically to receive our transactions. And that's, for me, accounting at scrapes.ai. For you, it might be accounts at company name. And we can see in our draft email here, I'm just going to send it from one mailbox to the other, that we've got a PDF attachment of a previous bill from Slack. And if we just open that up, you can see that it's got an amount due here, all of the details of an invoice, and the invoice was from July. So hopefully it's going to go and find the July transaction rather than the June or August and actually reconcile this together. So let's actually send that to our mailbox. But first we'll make sure that our workflow is active and actually receiving that. And this is going to set off the first part of the automation that's all about receiving into our mailbox an email that's potentially a receipt. And we need to determine at that point whether it is a receipt or not. So we're going to send that email. And then in a moment, we're going to look at the executions as it's processed through and see exactly what's happened. But we're effectively receiving an email, and every minute we're checking our Google Mail account. It then pulls the details from the email. And then we have two AI checks here. The first is just simply checking whether this email is worth processing or not. Because if it's an email that's not about a financial transaction, then we're not interested in this flow at all. So we've got this assess email, which takes the email subject, the email body here from the previous node, and we give it a simple prompt, which is effectively about that it's an email processing agent that identifies emails that contain invoices or billing related content. And we just give it some examples of what the inputs are going to be, certain subject lines that might come with invoice related words, and it simply outputs a true or false in here. So in the structured output parser, it's like, does it require processing? True or false? If it is true, it is processed. If it's false, i.e. it's not an email about a transaction, then we're not interested. We want to stop it there. We don't want to spend any more on the AI tokens, so we stop the execution there. So if we have a quick look at the process here, so it's succeeded in its first process. So if we copy this to the editor, we'll be able to see exactly what's happened. So we received an email in, and you can see that it's pulled the attachment here. And then if we look at the schema or the table, we can see any of the contents of the email as well. That's all pulled in. And then inside the assess email, what we're pulling is the email subject and the email body. So in this case, I've left the email body completely empty. So it can be as vague as that. But normally something like Slack would send you some text also that would help us determine whether it's relevant or not. So we've got in the email subject, it's a Slack receipt. So it's probably going to determine that it does require processing. And we can see the output is simply true here, which means that in the filter node, if this is true, we're going to pass it to the next stage. And this next stage is where we extract key info about the invoice. And the point here, right, in this node is that either we're going to have an email that has a bunch of text in that we can extract information from and no attachments, or we're going to have an attachment, which is usually the source of truth, because that's going to be the full invoice or the full receipt. Or might get a blend of both, where we've got some text and some attachments. So we're prioritizing attachments here, but we're going to extract text from the email as well. So in the extract text info, you can see we have the email subject, the email body, and in this case, the email subject is Slack receipt. The email body was empty. And then in the prompts that we have down here, we're effectively asking it to pull invoice information from only the email text. And the most important thing here is if the email body or subject does not contain this information, leave it blank. Do not make up this information. And this is exactly the same information we're trying to extract from a PDF or an image as well in the later stages. So we've got things like description, invoice date, payment date, invoice number, and we've said which ones are hopefully required. We've said which ones are required, and it will try and extract that information. And you can see on the output that because the email body was pretty much empty, it's got Slack receipt, single payment, and it doesn't know any of the details, so it's kept those super blank. But in the next stage, we're basically going to prioritize the invoice attachment rather than the email body. So if the attachment was not there or did not exist, or we've just got text in the email, which is the receipt, then it's going to follow this second line here and basically process the information that we'll talk about in a minute. But it will determine the amount due, try and find the transaction, match that transaction, and then update our Google Sheet. But if there is an attachment like there was, it's going to grab the binary data from our original email. So you can see that the binary data is in here, and we use a code node to grab it from the original email because we can't just pass the binary data across, or it's more messy to do so. And then what we're doing is we're saying, does the attachment exist in our Google inbox? And we've got a certain naming convention, which I'll show you in a moment. Does it exist in our invoice file? If it already exists, then we don't want to upload it again. So we're just going to leave that blank. But if it does not exist already, then we're going to save that attachment to our invoice file. And you can see in our invoice uploads folder here, we've got the date of today. We've then got a supplier name. So because it's come from me, this is undefined, but this would normally say something like Slack. And then we've got some more information about the actual email that it's come from, including a link to that email, which we will extract later into the Google Sheet, as you see. And then if we click into this, you can see this is our uploaded invoice that we pulled earlier. Now, because this is uploaded an attachment, we then start our second flow separately on a G Drive trigger. So we've uploaded the attachment. We're now saying if any attachments are received in that Google Drive folder, then we're going to process those and extract the information from there. But we need to determine in this Google Drive folder, is it an image? Is it a PDF? And therefore we process it differently based on that. So let's now simulate exactly what would happen if a Google Drive receipt was uploaded and found in there. So we can go down to the triggers, go from G Drive trigger. And when you actually build this out yourself, all of the orange notes in here are things you need to update in terms of credentials or sheet access. And another one that I'll add in now is actually connecting this Google Drive account to the correct folder. So you're going to need to make sure that the URL inside this G Drive trigger goes to the invoice uploads folder in here. And then if we run a test trigger on that Google Drive trigger, it should pull the latest file that's been uploaded there. And it's then going to go through and process that. And if you remember correctly, the idea here was we're going to extract information from that invoice, and we're then going to bring it back to our finance sheet. And if we jump into our finance sheet, we can see the output. So I was actually wrong initially. It was an August invoice if I look back at it, not July. So it's £22.08. And what it's done is the automation has found the email that it's come from. So I can open the email link in here and it will show me the email that I've received with that invoice. And you can see, as long as you're in the right email account, it will open up that email that's been sent. So it's got a link back to that email. We've then also got a link directly to the Google Drive folder where we've got the attachment saved. We've got the file name. We've got all of the extracted text that it's pulled. So if we want to refer back to it later, it's got that. And then we've even got the download link. So we can download the file directly, upload it to our accounting software. And then later when we extend this system, this will be a complete bookkeeping system that will connect with our accounting software. We'll be able to put this directly in our accounting software like Free Agent or Xero or QuickBooks. And you can see that the P&L category is unattributed. So I've just got a lookup column in here that I would say, okay, this provider name, if it doesn't recognize it, is actually software. So in the future, it would now recognize, if I go back to Raw Live, that those are software expenses. And that will also help later when we reconcile in our accounting software. So if we go back to the automation, we'll see exactly what happened here in the second part. So we uploaded the attachment to the Google Drive, and then that signified that the second flow or the third flow should start. So we download the Google Drive, and then we determine whether it's an image or a PDF. And the reason we're doing that is because we want to use optical character recognition to actually read the contents of both images and PDFs, but we need to upload them in different ways. So if it's an image, i.e. the MIME type is image or contains image, then we're going to put it through Mistral OCR. And Mistral OCR is one of the top performing and best value for money optical character recognitions. So in summary, it views visually all your receipts and will extract text from it. So it takes unstructured data like an image and extracts text from it. The same as a PDF. If the PDF contains images or just text, it will extract all that information, and it's $1 per 1,000 pages. So very, very cost effective. And accounting is something you want to get right. You don't want to be reconciling these manually because it's going to take you more time than it is by just paying $1 for 1,000 pages to get it right first time. So we use HTTP requests to upload directly into Mistral here. And the way Mistral works is you've got to host the file on their server first, or host the file and then extract information from the file. So we use this Mistral HTTP request to purely upload the binary file, to grab the file URL from Mistral. And then finally, this is the bit that's different between the two flows. The first is for a document format. So inside our JSON here, we have a document URL, and we link dynamically to the URL from the signed URL. And then if it's an image, instead, we just change that it's an image URL. That's simply it, the only change between those two lines. They then both get put into this extract from JSON. So you can see from the image that we sent in to Mistral that we've received all of this markdown or text back. So it's got a breakdown of all of the context from our receipt in text format that we can then pass into our LLM node to say, okay, you've now got it in text format, extracts that information the same way in which you would up here extracting text info. And this is where the template gets really clever, because actually at this point, the single best identifier for a receipt to a transaction on this list is actually just the amount due. That is the first and best indicator. So what we do with this LLM chain is we take in the markdown that we've received from the image or the PDF. And you can see it's got all of the text from the receipt in. And then we tell it that you would basically just review the whole bit of text and work out what is the amount due. That is simply what it's asking here. And it gives a few examples to extract the amount due there. It will then pull all of our live transactions from the sheet. So here we just have 4. So it pulls the 4 transactions. And you can see that we've got the amount and local amount in here. And what we're effectively doing is sorting by the most recent, because we're pulling these live and hopefully processing them every time a receipt comes in and every time a transaction comes in. It's best to just sort them first and then try and find the most recent transaction that matches. We then put it through a loop which says, okay, given all of these transactions in time order or most recent, try and match this transaction. So the final LLM load is all about matching the transaction. So we have all of the transaction data from each row that we've passed in. And you can also limit this to the most recent 10 transactions to save it processing, thousands of transactions using the limit node. We've then got the invoice markdown directly underneath. So we've got the transaction, and then we've got the invoice markdown, which will stay constant for each loop. And it says, does this transaction match this invoice? And it's looking for certain details on that. So we've got another prompt in here, which says, you're a transaction matching agent. Compare the invoice data with the existing transaction records. Return true or false. Here are your inputs. Extract invoice key data and make sure that you are sure that this transaction matches. And then it's going to output true or false. False, it will just ignore it and keep going, try and find the next transaction. But for true, it will say, okay, let's update then in the sheet. So that is how we've ended up with it finding this transaction, because it's pulled this transaction details, compared it to the invoice receipt that text, and therefore worked out that this is correct based on the date and based on the amount, as well as the details on the invoice. So it's fairly complex logic, but broken down into a few key stages. And then if it goes round all of the transaction and it does not find a matching transaction, then what we're going to do is upload that to an unmatched receipts, because what we don't want to do is just lose the receipt there. We still want it stored somewhere, so that later, if we are going through our live transactions when we're doing year end, we can see that there's some that are not matching or do not have a matching receipt. So therefore, we're going to go to the unmatched receipts and easily be able to find those as well. So we've done an example with a PDF where we've got multiple potential matches here to prove that this is capable of doing that. Let's do the other 2 use cases here. The first one is an image. So I've just uploaded a random receipt here of a meal out. So it's going to extract information from an image and not from a PDF. And then the second use case is a Google transaction that's not on our transaction list. And we're going to show that it ends up on our unmatched transactions. So we still store it somewhere. So let's send the image now. And let's also send the Google receipt. So I've just gone to the invoice folder and we've got the 2 invoices, again, undefined supplier because it's come from me directly, but otherwise would normally say exactly who it's from. And you can see that we've got the image receipt here and the PDF receipt from Google, which should be unmatched and not be able to find. So let's go back to the flow and see exactly what's happened in these executions. And we can see, firstly, this is the image that's been uploaded directly into the Google Drive. But what we're more interested in is the next stage of processing, which is if there is an attachment, which in all these cases there is, has it found a match and has it processed it correctly? And for the restaurant, we know that already we've got a row that should be matched in here because it's got the same date to the same amount. And then we've also got the Google Drive file, which should appear eventually in unmatched receipts up here. And it seems to have processed it 4 times here, but it's actually pulled out, if I just delete those, the correct receipt here, and I can open directly the receipt that's unmatched. So if I could not find a transaction that matched this from Google, and I can see that it's got all the invoice information, so £11.80, Google Cloud EMEA, and then I removed or redacted the billing details so that, I've taken my personal details off this. But we can see that it pulls all of the information from this PDF. And we've basically been able to say, okay, it's unmatched. So when we come to reconcile our invoices, we'll see that this receipt exists somewhere and we've saved it, but it's unmatched. So we can find then the relevant thing. The only thing it's been unable to pull is the date of the invoice. And I wonder whether that's because it's not on here directly. I mean, it's not pulled it, but 30th of June. So we can come in there and we can manually apply that. But it's going to, most of the time, be able to pull this information correctly. But the idea is it does 95% of the work for us. And then these are the edge cases that we do ourselves. So let's go back and then let's run this for our most recent invoice, which is the meal, which it should be able to find. So if we run the Google Drive trigger now, it should hopefully find our, yes, Matina lunch. And then it's put that through, because it's an image, it's put that through the second branch, which uploads to OCR, uploads to Mistral OCR. And then we've extracted all of the information again around the transaction details. And it's going to try and match that now to our 4 transactions. And as expected, it's found a match and it's updated our Google Sheet. So if we scroll across here, we've got the Matina transaction with the email, with the receipt, with the file name, with the extracted text, so we can see exactly what was bought there, and with the download link as well. So to summarize, we've now got a complete bookkeeping system that monitors an account's email. It uploads all files into a Google Drive or SharePoint or whatever we want to do. We can swap this out for any software, and it's able to handle all of these use cases. So matching correct transactions, even when there's multiple suppliers. And it does that by finding the most recent information and trying to map to that directly. It handles images as well as PDFs, and it always prioritizes attachments over email bodies. But if it's got no email body, we process that as well, and we try and match the transaction to just an email, not an attachment. And then it also handles where we have cases, edge cases, where there's no transaction in our bank, but we've actually received a receipt. So we can actually reconcile those edge cases manually, and they're still stored in one central location. Nice and easy for us. This should save you a lot of time. And an extension of this, which we're going to build inside the community, is that it's going to be able to connect to your accounting software. So for example, QuickBooks, Xero, or FreeAgent. And this will save you a ton of time when you come to reconcile all those invoices. Now, don't get me wrong, this isn't the full accounting flow, but it will save you a lot of time with manual work that nobody really likes to. If you want to grab the complete template, then make sure to go to school.com/scrapes and go to the resource hub. And we've got the full step-by-step setup guide inside there as well.